It seems to me last week, Jean-François Roberge, our language minister, took the time to let us know in an interview he did with the Montreal Gazette that with respect to Bill 96, because parts of the bill come into effect June 1st, and there's been obviously a lot of speculation that some of the elements that will come into effect on that date are not necessarily going to be good for Anglophones, and he went out of his way to say, no. I believe the words he used were good faith. In other words, if you need service provided in English, they're not going to ask you for an ID card or any kind of thing like that. They will simply ask you, are you entitled to receive these based on your educational status? And if you say yes, supposedly they're going to take you at their word, which to both of us seemed kind of crazy.
Yeah. Although they did say they are going to be doing specific training so that
for staff. To let them know what the answer yes means. So
I don't know.
A little vague, I think, in that sense. But, the idea that he would say that to try to appease Anglophones and make us consider that, no, maybe nothing will change. We thought we need to follow up on that. We've spoken to Eric MALDOFF before. He is a lawyer here. He's also spoken out on, Anglo rights in the city. Eric is back on the line. Eric, first of all, thank you for taking the time this afternoon.
Thank you for inviting me.
I would like to begin with something the minister said at the end of all that, which he seemed to actually take time to go out of his way and talk about the healthcare system. This has been an issue since Bill 96 was introduced, the idea that what's going to happen now in the system if you're an Anglophone, or if you've been here even as an immigrant for more than 6 months and should have learned French by that time. He says absolutely nothing is going to change. He also said it is in the bill that nothing will change in healthcare. Have you been able to verify that? What's your take on that?
I hate sounding like this, to be honest with you, because it's growing quite tiring to keep having to come back at it. And I'm sure that is for most people listening right now. Effectively, his public statement is in relation to a linguistic policy of the state, which was published or adopted on April 9th. And that's called for under Bill 96, or Bill 101 is amended by 96. That policy is supposed to stipulate the conditions in which another language than French may be used. The language policy that's been put out, simply put, does not talk about self-identification. There's not a word in it, and I have read it to that effect. It does say there are exceptions when other languages can be used, but the means or manner in which that will happen are not laid out in the linguistic policy that was published. The only place you'll find it is in the newspaper reports, and this is this idea of a good faith declaration. Let's remember, the public service of Quebec is got 1% English-speaking personnel. So somebody phones in, and usually it's somebody who's feeling a little bit vulnerable. Dealing with the state or the government is always a bit anxiety-provoking. You get on the phone, you say, I'd like to be served in English. Well, the first thing we all have to remember is that they have written into not only the Charter of the French Language, but the Quebec human rights legislation, that it is a human right for people to be able to work in French. So the person who's receiving this request may be thinking, well, I have a right to work in French, why would I do this? Let's hope they're not thinking that, but that's only a hope. If they're not thinking that, they still, according to the minister, can not ask you to self-identify as English-speaking, but to state why you think you have this entitlement. Well, that should be off-putting enough for somebody who's in trouble, needs to speak, and suddenly they're asking you those kinds of questions. Where it goes from there, Lord only knows. In terms of the protection in the Health and Social Services Act, there is Section 15 of the Act guarantees the right of English-speaking people to health and social services in the English language. The Charter of the French Language, as amended by 96, says nothing's changed in Section 15, that right in the Health and Social Services Act. But that's not quite the case, because the personnel provisions of Bill 101 now affect the language of work and affect who's going to get hired and promoted and transferred to positions. Furthermore, the language policy states, even if you can use another language, it is never to be used systematically. And institutional bilingualism is incompatible with Bill 101. We have a number of institutions, municipalities, health and social services, etc., that have been designated as bilingual institutions under Bill 101, Section 29.1. They are institutionally bilingual. Now we have a policy that says institutional bilingualism is incompatible with the Charter of the French language. And if you don't believe it, I'm assuming you'll say, well, why do you say that, Eric? Because the Health and Social Service Act has a section 508. It's been in for a long time. And it says bilingual recognized institutions, those that are 29.1 bilingual recognized, must make all of their services available in the English language. Services at a health and social service institution are not only the direct clinical services, they're the administrative services, there's the reception, the intake, the instructions, all the other things that go with it. And 508, incidentally, has been dropped out of the new Health and Social Services Act proposed by the government in Bill 15, which replaces the current act. And if adopted, there's no more recognition of bilingual institutions having an obligation to deliver all of their services in English. Furthermore, they've removed under Bill 15 the obligation to include in access programs for services in the English language. They've removed from that the reference to bilingual institutions because they've knocked 508, the statement of those institutions making all their services available in English. They've taken that out as a necessary component of a health and social service plan. Furthermore, they've taken out the personnel requirements of an access program for health and social services. So consequently, access programs don't have to include bilingual institutions, don't recognize that all their services have to be available, and don't recognize that institutions have to have a human resources plan such that they can actually deliver the service and not just say they could deliver the service. So that's more or less the picture that's shaking up. I think that Robert's making this statement publicly is trying to correct the policy that was published that doesn't even say this matter of self-identification, and more or less trying to appease probably moderate francophones who are worried that this government's been a bit excessive. So he makes that statement. For people who are going to be trying to get services, this does nothing.
I want to just, you said two words, which, and I don't understand why, because this bill has been adopted. You said if adopted. Where are we if adopted? What do you mean?
Okay, there's a new Health and Social Services Act that the government has proposed. It's called Bill 15, and it would replace the Health and Social Services Act. It's right now being considered by the National Assembly with a view to it being adopted as a replacement to the current Health and Social Services Act. And hopefully the government will allow enough time for discussion of what that bill would do, but they're right now looking like they're trying to ram it through as quickly as possible.
Okay, before we let you go, I'd like to know your take on this. So when we pose this question to our listeners, that Jean-François Roberge, the minister, says you can just self-identify and it'll be accepted, many of them texted in to say, basically, hell no, they don't trust that that would be accepted and that they would prefer to have a card that they present that says, I am a historic Anglophone. What do you say to that?
I think that is second-class citizenship in its best form. Mm-hmm. And I think that, frankly, we are a big community of over 1 million people in this province. We have a long-standing presence and a continuing presence as a viable, contributing part of Quebec society. And I think all of us are getting rather tired of it being suggested that we should hide our presence, we should not be visible, not be heard, and anything that we do, it will be a privilege at the whim of some bureaucrat. This is not an acceptable solution, nor have bureaucrats handing out cards to people that they are certified as allowed for services. There are lots of examples in society, in other societies and other periods of time, where these kinds of approaches are really quite unacceptable of distinguishing citizens that way. If we have a right to service, we have a right to service.
Eric, I thank you as always for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I should have allowed you to ask more questions.
I think you wrapped it up pretty well. Now I'm concerned about Bill 15, which I hadn't even considered up until now.
Oh, please do. This is really a serious problem. you should know they're getting rid of all these integrated health centers. There will be one board of directors running all health and social services for the entire province.
All right.
Think of what that means for service.
Eric MALDOFF, Montreal lawyer. Eric, thanks again. I appreciate it.